Good morning. It's Sunday, January 16th. And as usual, in the mornings after I release my rants, I go looking for other things to rant about. So I found an interesting news show on my computer, and it talked about Spotify and Joe Rogan. Now, Joe Rogan is a podcaster. Now, I've never seen anything that he has done personally, and I've never even watched anything on Spotify. I'm not even really sure how Spotify fits into the world of internet social media. I always thought it was like a place where there was some music that you could listen to. But in any event, the article, the talk about this show was the fact that this gentleman, Joe Rogan, was putting out all kinds of misinformation with respect to COVID, and talking about the fact that the vaccination was causing people to have myocarditis. And the other interesting thing that happened on this particular show is that his guest had the nerve to correct Joe Rogan. Explained to Joe Rogan that the myocarditis that is caused by COVID is 10 or 20 times greater than the myocarditis that is caused by vaccination. So why is he telling people that vaccinations cause myocarditis? He's telling people that because he's probably an anti-vaxxer, and he's against the vaccinations, and he's got to have something to talk about. And so he propagates all of this misinformation out there. And he's got millions of followers. So he's a dangerous, dangerous man. I might even call him like a criminal for producing so much misinformation. But I won't go that far. I'll just call him an ignoramus. But here's another. Spotify is just one of the major social media platforms that you can get misinformation. There's Twitter, there's Instagram, and I don't know how many others that are less famous, let's say, right? And the people who podcast on those shows, who have followings in the millions, have a responsibility to fact check everything they put out there. But the individuals don't. For the most part, they don't. I'm quite sure that these people want their followers to listen to them, and so they may come up with many preposterous statements. And so this entire situation is really in the hands of, I will call them, the podcast managers, the platforms that allow podcasting. They have a responsibility to the public to ensure that the information that's given out is accurate. Now, they can do that more easily, I guess, on Twitter or on one of the other platforms where it's really not a podcast, it's just written information, because they can have some sophisticated algorithms that attempt to capture the speech and note that the information is incorrect, and they can stop it. And we know that Taylor Greene and Donald Trump have been banned from Twitter. But the podcast universe is entirely. There's nobody out there managing the podcasters. Those guys are on their own. And they can say pretty much whatever they want. And it'll reach millions of people. And even if it's wrong, the only thing that can be done at that point is that they could stop him from podcasting or her from podcasting anymore. And maybe they can even send out something to all the millions of people who had listened to the podcast and said, you know, the information you just received from Joe Rogan is incorrect. And therefore, we are warning you not to listen. Don't believe it. Blah, blah, blah. Right? But how much of an effect will that have? That will never sink in. And the millions of people who heard it, they won't be listening the next time. They won't be listening to the retraction of what Joe Rogan said. So the podcast, and maybe one of the things that the podcast universe should do is, if you spew misinformation, then you will not be able to podcast anymore unless you get online to a universe and state categorically that you made a monumental mistake and that you said something you shouldn't have said and that your information was bad. And make any excuse you want, but you have to get that information corrected. You cannot let millions of people go out and believe what I will call bald-faced lies. And knowing that podcasting and writing on Twitter and things like that is reaching so many people, it's dangerous. And there's no universal protector. Like we have the FCC to protect us from stuff that we hear on television. But there's no universal organization that's watching what's being podcasted. And maybe we need to do something about that. And then we will have a huge outcry on the stifling of free speech. Now, free speech is a great thing. It's a great thing if you state categorically, this is my opinion, and then you can say it's free speech. But when you go out there and you pretend to know what you're talking about, and you tell people a set of falsehoods, facts that are not true, that's not free speech. That's lying. And I don't think lying falls in the category of free speech. Well, maybe it is free speech. But how about if you're willing to tell a lie? How about you say, this is a lie. It's free speech, but this is a lie. I'm going to tell you the lie. That'll never happen. And so we sit around and we allow this to propagate. And every event that goes on in the world has probably got a podcast going with it. And probably 50 or 75% of the podcasts are wrong. Because the podcasters have to do something to make them stand out from the rest of the crowd. So maybe they stretch the truth a little bit. You know, there's nobody managing the podcasters in this. It's a dangerous, dangerous situation that we find ourselves in. Because this misinformation travels far and wide and fast. So I warn you, if you are hooked on podcasters, that you have to make sure that they're telling you the truth. And there ought to be something in the podcast universe that agrees with the podcast. So if I'm Spotify or I'm Instagram and I see something that's wrong, I have to make a contraction. I have to get out there and tell people, Joe Rogan made a big mistake, and we're pulling this session off the air. He's suspended for 2 weeks or so. It's very wishful thinking in mine. But I'm warning you that what you hear and what you see in those podcasts is not necessarily the truth. So let me give you a list of the top 10 social media. You got Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, Pinterest, Reddit, YouTube, and WhatsApp. Those are all the major players in the world of social media. And so any one of them can give you misinformation. So it's caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. So that's it for today, and I'll see you in the morning.